We are 16 weeks into the year, and that means for my 52 book challenge, I should be 16 books into the year. And so far, I'm ahead of schedule. But if you're new here, my name is Jennifer from Watkins Through Life, and I'm on a challenge to complete 52 book prompts as well as countless other life prompts throughout the year. So far, I have read 19 books since the beginning of the year, but really only 9 since the last book update, which I will link above, but let's get down to the new ones. First, let's talk about Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I gave this a solid 4 stars, which is right in line with the slightly above 4-star average on Goodreads. And I loved the alternate history perspective of it, the quirks of the underground. The plot was just so incredibly unique. And although I did suspect the bad guy, it was written so well that I didn't even mind that I saw it coming. The reason I didn't mark this as a 5-star book for me is because I found the pacing lacking at times, and those times happened to be when the characters were being idiots, and I just have a hard time with that in general. In my edition of Neverwhere that I was reading, it had the short story How the Marquis Got His Coat Back, and I found it to be very likable, but maybe that's because it was based solely on the Marquis character, which was my favorite character. But nevertheless, it gave us more of his backstory, more of the quirkiness and oddness of the underground, and just more in a very quick and lighthearted way. 5 out of 5, it's a total knockout for me. The next book I went through is Daughter of Deceit by Victoria Holt, and there's definitely a bit of a history as to why I'm reading it, why I actually own it, and why I will always own it, no matter what rating I give it. When I was in middle school, my family was going through the process of moving from Washington to Arizona, and during a couple months interim between selling our house and moving, we lived with my grandparents, and the room my sister and I stayed in had this one shelf, and it was just books, books, books. And let me tell you, I ripped through those books. I've always kind of used reading as a way of avoiding life, and this experience was no different. I legitimately remember nothing about these books. Absolutely nothing. I vaguely remember the name Victoria Holt, but that's it. So when my grandparents were moving out of that house and they approached me and were like, "We'd like you to have this book. We just remember how much you loved it all those years ago." I was ecstatic because now I have a book passed down to me from both sets of grandparents, but I also felt bad because I did not remember the book at all. So yes, I will always be keeping this book, even though it's only like a 3-star book for me. It's basically an attempt to make a tragedy akin to the likes of Tress of Duberville, where anything that can go wrong for the character will go wrong for the character. Except this one has a bit more murder. I did enjoy the relatively quick pacing, all of the different settings that we got to explore within the book, so it had all of that going for it. The main downfall is just that I'm not super into tragedies, which apparently preteen me loved, I guess, but that sounds about right, to be honest. Next up was Cartographers by Peng, and I really enjoyed the exploration of the paper towns concept, and while the magic-y element was a little out of the blue, it was presented in such a way that it didn't feel so out of place for me. The uniquity of each plot device and the depth of each character brought it up to 4 stars for me. The loss of a star happened whenever there was a flashback. So basically her parents' friends tell these flashback stories, and it goes from, "No! You must leave right away. We're in a hurry. It's a rush. You gotta get out of here. I can't tell you anything," to 30 minutes of, "Well, let me slow the pace down and tell you in a complete change of voicing and character every little detail that happened." So it was just a very quick and abrupt change. I think the flashbacks were necessary. I just don't love the voicing shift that happened in them. Overall, it was a great read, and I'd love to see more done with cartography in the literary world. This book has been on my to-be-read list for a while, and it's The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. First off, I didn't realize how based in truth this was. Not only is it a real place and a real event, like a real war, real struggle, but it's also based on real people. In the author's note at the end, she mentioned how she traveled throughout Europe to help with the refugee effort, and how a lot of her interactions with these people inspired the story. And I really think that those experiences are what make this book so dead on. This book has an awkward time stream jumping around from place to place and time to time, and not always in 2 linear progressions, but frequently skip from current day to here, to current day to there, to here, to there, current day. And it could be disorienting, but there were always 3 ways to tell exactly where you were. His wife's eyesight, the loss of his son, and the appearances of Muhammad. Every time you saw one of those three things, you were immediately grounded to the timeline. These three things don't just place you in the timeline. They're also hugely important elements in the story. Usually I feel like bringing up elements that you're trying to symbolize 1,000 times isn't a great technique. It feels like you're hitting your reader over the head with them. But in this case, because they were so deeply woven into the story and they were events and they were people, I think it worked remarkably well. I also think that if the book was told in a purely chronological format, it would have lost a lot of its pacing, its charm, and parallels between the timelines. So while I think that a flashback format is difficult to pull off, it really was the only logical choice here. Now, some of the people in my neighborhood, we decided to start a book club, and because it was only a couple weeks before we started to meet, we wanted to choose a book that was simpler to get through, not necessarily simpler in theme, but just a quicker read. And we chose The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charles Mackesy. I was definitely way off in my expectations. I was expecting something like Winnie the Pooh-esque that took place in maybe like the early 50s, and boy was I wrong. This book is basically a collection of beautiful watercolors and drawings of these characters, and the dialogue is mostly aphorisms that these characters are using to guide their fears and anxieties throughout their journey. Reading the author's note beforehand is definitely a requirement for fully understanding and loving this book. And then once you finish, the artwork is what sells it. This is a great book that I will definitely be keeping on my shelves to have and hold and pull out whenever I need that warm and fuzzy feeling inside. After I finished that book, I went over to my sister's place and they let me borrow The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm by Christopher Paolini. This is a short story collection that he's made for his Aragon world. Basically, this is a collection of 3 stories told to Aragon to help him through his struggles in creating a safe haven for dragons. The first 2 are absolutely lovely, but the third is incredibly slow, is only vaguely relevant to what he's going through at the time, and the voice that it's told in doesn't appeal to me. Seriously though, the last story takes up like half of the page space, and I wouldn't do that unless it's the best of the 3, and this definitely is not. 40 Autumns by Nina Willems was the next book for me, and it was mind-blowing to hear more about this experience. It chronicles the life of a family as they're separated for 40 years by the Berlin Wall. It starts just after the end of World War II when Soviets are moving into East Germany, and then ends in modern day after the wall's been down, after they've been reunited. And so you really get to see the parallels between the 2 lives on either side of the wall, the struggles. You get a very unique history on what was happening. It is a piercing retelling of the family's experiences, and it reframes the conflict in ways that I never expected. The extent of my schooling on this issue was that the Soviets built the Berlin Wall to separate off East Germany and to encourage communism. And then when the Berlin Wall came down, the Cold War was over. So am I surprised that so much of this book was brand new information? No, but I absolutely cannot recommend it enough, even if your prior knowledge is more than mine. And lastly, our copy of Tress by Brandon Sanderson finally arrived. So many of my friends have been getting on me because we did order the ebook version as well. So I could have read it. I just really wanted that hardcover, beautiful, embossed and engraved and luxury feeling, and boy did I get it. It is the most beautiful copy of a book I have ever owned, probably. I love it. And I love the contents of it even more. One of my favorite things that Sanderson does is that he doesn't just create a character, he creates a character with quirks, like collecting cups. It's such an odd character trait that a normal author would never think to include, let alone make an important and recurring element of the character throughout this adventure book. And yet, it is so lovable. And it's not only her. Every single character has these little details that just make everything feel so deep and welcoming, and like you just want to be there and devour the book. 5 stars, read Tress, read it now, love it. The only other book that I've started so far is The Alchemist, but I was reading that on Libby, and I'd only read an hour of it before it had to be returned, and it has like a 26-week or something crazy like that waiting list. So it might be a while before I finish that one. So there we are for the month of April. I'll probably do another reading update like midsummer, June or July. But until then, please enjoy the writing, baking, gaming, and life prompts to come.